She said race, equality, and social justice, which wouldn't have been so bad, but then the final clause is in our schools. Seventh-day Adventist education, race, equality, and social justice in our schools. Amen. Very important topic. Amen. However, I have had to exercise some pastoral judgment. So I'm going to have to split this topic into two, simply because I cannot do it justice in one sermon sitting. Just too much there, okay? However, I do think the topic is very important, so my next sermon will be the second half of this. So today, I'm going to talk specifically about Christian education, Seventh-day Adventist education. And then my next sermon, which is, Elder, you can probably tell me when it is. It was within a few weeks. Then I will tackle race and social justice and equality. This is a big topic. But let me give you a little commercial. Let me give you a little commercial for the sermon. When we talk about race relations, racism, when we talk about social justice or lack thereof, social injustice, when we talk about equality, it normally invokes a response. Does it not? There are certain things, just being very transparent, there are certain things for me that I can't even watch on television because it invokes a response in me that is just not healthy. I can read about it. I can even talk about it. But sometimes when you see it in live enactment, it takes on I don't know, it evokes a different response. And there are different responses to racism and social injustice and lack of equality, especially in the black community. You don't need a history lesson to know that over the years of our country, there have been some, challenges in regard to this. This is just a commercial. I'm not going to preach a sermon. I told you I can't do it today. But there are a number of responses. And I will tell you that, let me just get to the end of what I'm going to say here. The only real good response is the Christian response. And that's where I'll go in my next sermon. What is the Christian response to racism and inequality and social injustice? I believe from the reading of my Bible that there is such a response. And I believe that the Christian response will elicit good results. However, there are some other responses that I see far too often that don't get us anywhere. Like the emotional response. Emotional responses to racism and social injustice and inequality are no good. They're no good. We have to learn, and when I say we, I'm talking about all humans, we have to learn to stop speaking out of emotion. Because when emotion goes too big, logic goes out the window. I mean, you can see it. You know when you get a little emotional at work. You know when you get a little emotional in your marriage. Emotions are often the enemy of good results. Then there's the retributive response. Right? So you got me, I'm going to get you. Retribution. And that response as well, it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't accomplish any good results. Then one of the worst responses is the response of ignorance. Y'all know what the ignorant response is? You know what ignorant means. Over time, ignorant has come to it's like an insult. Like, you call somebody ignorant, it's like, you're ignorant. By definition, it just means not knowing. It's a lack of knowledge. And I find that oftentimes, when we talk about racism and social injustice and what's the other one? Inequality. We often have a response of ignorance. Amen. What I mean is we don't even know what's going on, yet we have a very quick response. Amen. I got to watch the clock because I said we're going to preach about this. But listen, But listen, let me tell you, I'm a social media guy. I like social media. It can be used of God and it can definitely be used of the devil. But I like social media. And I'm amazed when I read on social media when something happens. Within 30 seconds, there are elicited but unsolicited responses to the situation. And 98% of the people were not there. Like this happened in Colorado. You're in Tahoma, but you know what went down. Listen, it's just ignorant. It's ignorant. I mean, you got to wait a little bit. You got to see what happened. Now, the facts may come out and your presupposition may be proved correct. Or it may not be. But don't be so ignorant as to just jump on it and just go with it. Let me tell folks, if I really wanted to stand up here and give you my opinion on A, B, and C, I'm smart enough to find videos, articles, and people who could substantiate what I want you to believe. It's not that hard. So you got to be careful. Just because somebody writes an article, just because somebody authors a book, just because somebody puts a video on Facebook to support their point, it doesn't mean it's legit. That was commercial. Let me get to none of that is in my sermon notes. Let me get to my sermon. So next week we will talk about the Christian response to social injustice, racism, and equality. But let's talk about education. Let's talk about education. Let me I have a disclaimer. Let me go ahead and give let me read the text first. Simple text that you have all heard before. Look at that. Look how that happens. I'm glad I know my text. I must have moved my marker. Proverbs 22:6. You've all heard it before, haven't you? I'll read it to you from the NIV. One sentence. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Let me give you my biases up front. Proverbs 22:6. That's it. Let me give you my biases up front. Right? It's always good to know people's biases talking to you. So I have some biases. So I am Adventist educated. Okay? I started kindergarten in an Adventist school. I graduated from an Adventist university. I have a graduate degree from a different Adventist university. The only time I was not in Adventist education were the few years in my elementary when my mom couldn't afford it. And so I had to come out for a couple years till she could get the money together with the help of my grandmother and the help of the church and got me back in. But for the most part, I am both Adventist educated and Adventist trained. I am the spouse of an educator. My wife is an elementary school teacher. She prefers, and for the majority of her career, she has taught in our Adventist schools. There are times, because of my profession as an Army chaplain, once I left the conference and joined the Army, there are times because of movement that the timing doesn't work out to be in an Adventist institution, so she has taught in the public sector as well. But I can tell you that I get the inside scoop on Adventist education by having an Adventist teacher who's in the school. So I am Adventist educated. My wife is also, as I tease my mom. Now I am a what am I? I'm a different kind of Adventist. My wife is pure Adventist. That's what I tell her. My wife is pure. Now when you think of Adventist, you got to think of my wife. The daughter of a pastor. She had no years outside of Adventist education, long skirt wearing, no jewelry having, vegetarian eating, Seventh-day Adventist. That is my wife. God be praised. I'm a little different. People ask me all the time, they say, people ask me, especially in the context in which I work, as an Army chaplain, I'm often surrounded by Christians of other faiths. And so they will also often ask me, did I grow up Adventist? And I always answer that question by saying yes and no. I grew up Adventist in how I described to you. However, I did not grow up in a context where Adventism was kind of forced or pushed upon me. My grandmother was the first Adventist in our family. My mother and my aunt came to Adventism as well. But my grandmother never really forced it on me. You know, I just kind of went to church with my grandmother because I lived with my grandmother. And then I had friends in the church. I should have added that to my sermon. I had friends in the church, which kept me in the church, wanting to go to church. And then by being in proximity to the things of God, God got a hold of me. But I didn't come from a home where it was like kind of shoved down my throat. You know, I knew about the Sabbath, but nobody was standing over me, helping me to observe the Sabbath or requiring me to keep the Sabbath, which I think for me worked out well. Because had it been different, I would have been, I was going to say probably, I would have been the rebellious Adventist child. I would have it. Every child is different. So I have been educated. My wife is an educator. Obviously, you know that I am an Adventist pastor. And then my experience in education in the Army has given me a number of opportunities to teach. My wife, my family and I, we were stationed at the United States Military Academy, which is West Point, which is the Army's university. And I got to teach there and really open my eyes to education and principles of education. And then the Army sent me, that was where we were before we came here, yes. The Army sent me to the Chaplain school, where we take preachers and we bring them into the Army and we turn them into chaplains, right? And so they become, you know, they were pastors and now they're pastor, soldier mixed together and they become chaplains. I learned a lot about adult education because all my students were adult, seasoned ministers and how you teach in that context. My second chapter of life will come maybe sooner than later. I'm not sure what God has in plan, but I feel so strongly about education that's probably what I will do. That will be I believe that's what God is calling me to in my second chapter of ministry, and that is to teach. A calling and a ministry, as our dear principal mentioned in his remarks, definitely a calling and a ministry. So I feel very strongly about education and the good that it can do in building God's kingdom. I want to be very transparent because I hate to be any type of hypocrite when I stand before God's people. So I want you to know what we've done with our children before I get into my sermon notes. My wife and I decided that when we were going to have children, which was year 5 or 6 of our marriage, that she was going to come out of the classroom because of our view of education, how important it is. She was going to come out of the classroom. We were going to homeschool our children. So we did that up until 2 years ago. And then 2 years ago, my wife made the transition back to the classroom. And we were fortunate enough that there was a position, and there was a need in the Adventist school where we were. And so my wife went to that Adventist school, and of course my children went there as well. And then we moved here, and we had some very, very serious conversations about education and what we're going to do with our children based on the context of being here for the time we are here. And so this year we literally conducted an experiment. Sorry, children. Sorry you are an experiment. But we did conduct an experiment. So for the first time ever, they are in public school. The year is almost over, but they were in public school this year. And so my wife and I have been very astute to the context and the situation and really examining how it works and what it does and what the effect is. And so now we are at another crossroads. As next year my son will enter high school, my other son right behind him for high school, and then my baby girl's a little ways behind going into the third grade. So that's what we've done. That's what we have done. That's where my wife and I come from in terms of education, Adventist education. That's what we have done with our children. So let me get back to my text here this morning. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. So let me say 2 things about this text. I'm going to give you 3 sermon points, and we're going to go have some nice lunch. Number 1, I have heard people use this text as some type of guarantee of their efforts, in particular in their training and education with their children, and then in turn what the results should be. Okay? And if you read the text that way, you are reading it erroneously. Okay, let's read it again. train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I have heard some people question, when their children are adults, what happened? Right? And they quote this text. They say, I heard the chaplain preach about education, and I heard the principal talk about education, and I heard the kids' testimony about Christian education. So I made the sacrifice, and I put my kids in Christian education from kindergarten through Oakwood and Southern and PUC and Walla Walla. And now they don't go to church. And then you go down the list and they say, well, what happened? Well, what happened is you read the text wrong. That's what happened. This is not a guarantee from God that says if you do the right things in terms of training and education and schooling and mentorship and church and pathfinders, this is not a guarantee that if you do those things that your children will turn out a certain way. The reason why it's not a guarantee, and God himself could but does not make such a guarantee, is because God gives us choice. That's right. Amen. So God's never going to guarantee the results of a human's end result because we get to choose. So you can do your best with your children. When they are adults, they get to choose what they're going to do. So that's not the guarantee of this text. There is a guarantee, though. The guarantee in this text is that the training you provided that child will never depart from them. What that means is, as an adult, when they're out there in the club, there's this little voice in the back. And it's the principal's voice from Auburn Academy. And it says, you shouldn't be here. This is not good for you. You're not going to find a good spouse here.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
What it means is when they're an adult and they're in relationships they shouldn't be in, they're going to hear their pathfinder leader and a little small voice that says, hey, pick your friends wisely. So this is not a guarantee that a young person who is brought up the way that God intended will go where God wants them to go, but it is a guarantee that if we do our part, that training will always be there. And then our hope and our prayer is that if they deviate, that someday they will respond to that still small voice which says, this is the way, walk ye in it. Amen. Amen. God be praised. Now, this is difficult for us, but here's what we have to do. So if you do what God told you to do, and then you wind up with an adult child who's not doing what God wants them to do, you then have to transition. It's difficult for us as parents. Yes. Amen. You know, there are big transition points in parenting your children. Yes. And one of the problems that we make as parents is we don't properly transition. I cannot treat my 8-year-old like I treat my 14-year-old. They are at different stages of life. They have different levels of comprehension. There are things I share with my boys that I have yet to share with my daughter because she's just not ready. Amen. Amen. So we as parents, we have to grow with our children. Yes. Amen. We have to successively over the years let go. That's right. Amen. Amen. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's like my oldest son sitting over there. You know, it sucks to be a pastor's kid because you are a sermon illustration to death. But it's like my oldest son, BJ, right? He's growing up. I think about it every day. I got 4 years, and he's out the house. That's it. I got 4 more years. And there are times where I just want to grab PJ, my namesake, my son, and I want to shake knowledge into him. And I want to say, son, this is what you have to do with women. This is what you have to do with money. This is what you have to do with God. This is what you have to do. Right. Amen. Amen. Oh, that boy just looks at me like I don't know what I'm talking about. That's how you do me, man. That's how you do me. He looks at me in his 14-year-old wisdom. And, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. And I just want to shake him again. But what I have learned and what I am learning is I got to let go.
That's right.
I got to let go and let God. I do, right? So I'm trying, son. I'm trying to give you a little more freedom. Trying, right? Because 4 years from now, as he so eloquently stated around the fire last night. Oh, yes, it's the first time he's ever said that. As he so eloquently stated around the fire pit last night, when he's 18, he can do what he wants. Oh, yes, that's what he said to his father. Actually, no. Let me clarify. He said it to a friend of mine, another preacher, as we sat around the fire. And that preacher asked my son, good friend of the family, he says, so what are you thinking? What are you going to do with live? And he begins to explain his plan that we have talked about. I'm trying to convince him that it should be a plan B. He has it as a plan A. We will continue to dialogue about this, son. But in his conversation with that other pastor, he said, but once I turn 18, I make my own decisions. It is coming. Where'd I go? You got off my sermon notes. Let me look at my notes. See what you did, son? You got me off my sermon notes, man. Oh, talking about the guarantee. Yeah. So it's not a guarantee that our children won't deviate. It is a guarantee that the training will stay with them, which should spur us on to take the 18 years we have real serious, because it's all we got. Now, not that I'm going to give up on them when they're 19 and 20. We can still talk. I can still give advice. But he's right. He is right when he says that my instructions of today become advice tomorrow. He really doesn't have to do what I say. He gets to make his own decisions. And I'm praying he will listen in part to what I've said. But he really does get to do that. So the 18 years we have are critical. Because we're trying to give them what they need up until 70 and 80 years old. And you only got 18 years to do it. Talking about Christian education. Number two, this text, I only have two real sermonic points from this text. Number one, we need to know that we only have 18 years and we need to do it. Number two, the Bible clearly says that we have to train our children. We have to train our children. Now, for me being a military man, that means something. Right? There's no haphazard. Let me tell you a little bit about the Army. There's no haphazard training in the Army. It doesn't. I told y'all what I do for fun, and the Army pays me. I get to jump out of airplanes as an Army preacher. I love it. Love it. Well, why you don't make that face? It's a fun thing. She made that face like, you are foolish. Why would you jump out of an airplane, preacher? I love it. I really do. I'm glad the Army pays me to do it. But, when they trained me to jump, they didn't just take me up in an airplane and push me out. Right? So they sent me to get trained on how to exit an aircraft. Y'all want to know how to do it? Yeah. It's not really not that hard. You never know. It's not. It's very easy. It's very simple. You only have to do a couple things. Okay, you got to trust the parachute. It's going to work. Okay, you got two of them in case the first one doesn't work. You're good. You're good. Trust me. Amen. Thank you, Lord. It's very simple. It's very simple when they train you. You put your feet and your knees together. Jump as far out of the aircraft as possible so you don't hit the side of it. That hurts. Jump as far out of the aircraft as possible. Okay? Keep those feet and knees together all the way to the ground. When your toes feel the earth, just let your body crumble and get up and walk away. Amen. That's how you do it. That's all there is to jumping out of the aircraft. Now, even though I've summarized 3 weeks of training from 03 in the morning till 12 o'clock at night for 3 weeks straight, that is really the essence of it. But the Army takes it so serious because it's obviously a life and death matter that they train us over and over and over and over and over and over. So when you get there, the first thing you do is you stand here with nothing on, they teach you how to fall. And you get up and they teach you how to fall. And you get up and they teach you how to fall. Then they put you on a box. It's about as high as this pew. And they teach you how to fall. And they teach you how to fall. You do that for days on end. Then they put you on a little wire, right? And you slide down the wire. It's only about 6-7 feet off the ground. And then they teach you how to fall off the wire. Then they take you up to a tower. That's only 34 feet off the ground. Then they teach you how to fall. Then they put a fake parachute on you, about 90, 100 feet in the air, and they teach you how to fall. Then finally, they put you in an aircraft. Hopefully you learn how to fall. And you fall out the aircraft. So what's my point? My point is the Bible says you have to train your children. This is an intentional effort that God wants us to do.
Amen.
This is not a haphazard effort.
Amen.
There's a problem in many families in the church, and that we are not training our children.
Amen.
We are living with them.
Amen.
But we are not training anything into them.
That's right.
In fact, in some homes, they are training themselves.
That's right. That's right.
But they're 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So if they're in a home and the parents are not training them, then who's training your children? I can tell you who's training your children. DirecTV is training your children. YouTube is training your children.
That's right. Amen.
The neighbors' kids are training your children.
Right. That's right.
Video games are training your children.
Right. Amen. Guaranteed.
Bible says that's our job. Okay, 3 points. Let me give you my 3 points. I got 10 minutes to do it. Lord help me. Kids ain't going to be mad at me. Point number 1. When we think about education, you know what we think about? We think about that guy right there. We think about the principal. We think about Auburn. We think about Buena Vista. We think about Puyallup. Right? When we think about SC education, you're thinking wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Point number 1, education does not start at the school. It starts at home. Principal seems like a great guy. I just met him. You seem like an awesome dude. But God committed those children to me. And then he entrusts me to vet him and the school to undergird what I'm teaching them at home.
Amen. That's right. Amen.
His children are laying next to him right now. That's where he is first a principal. Education begins at home. You know the problem when little Johnny is acting up? Let me tell you the problem that I had with little Johnny. Y'all know little Johnny in the supermarket. Y'all know little Johnny. Well, sometimes I want to grab little Johnny myself. Man! Little Johnny in the supermarket. I want this cereal. Mom says no. He stopped, bam, 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 throwing cereal off the what? I know it's appropriate, it's inappropriate, so I would never say that, but I still want to go, man, can I help you for a second?
Please.
But here's the big problem with little Johnny. Here's the big problem. Little Johnny becomes Big Johnny. Little Johnny works at a store or works in corporate America or becomes an attorney or becomes a principal or becomes a preacher. And let me tell you something. Little Johnny, who flipped cereal boxes off the aisle and his mother and father allowed him to do so, do not make good principals, good preachers, good lawyers, or good anything. Now, no one is beyond the reach of God. So little Johnny could have a rough upbringing and then God could do a miracle. But I'm not talking about little Johnny and the miracle. I'm talking to parents right now. You can't let little Johnny run amok. I hear the kitchen calling. Number 1, education begins at home. Talking about little Johnny. Number 2, the education you're providing your child at home is not based on what you say. It's based on what you do. Let me talk to you Christians for a moment. Let me talk to you Seventh-day Adventists. Let me tell you, boy, Seventh-day Adventists talk a good game. Y'all are good. Y'all are good. You see the disassociation I do there? I do it with my wife all the time. I tell my wife about her church and her school and her kids all the time. Your example is what counts at home. PJ, you made the sermon a couple times today, brother. I got to keep going on you, man. You don't even remember this, but you may have heard me tell the story before. I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I was driving down the street, and I was on my way to church and on my way to preach. I tell you, some of my worst mornings are when I got to preach. That boy, that devil is, whoa, he be on me. He like, I'm gonna mess with you before you get up there to preach, so your mind can't be right. So I'm driving down the street to Fort Campbell. It was a great morning, beautiful morning. My wife only had one child at the time, PJ. He's not even a year old. He's sitting in the back, and he's in his little chair. And then up comes somebody besides me, cuts me off, and then throws me the bird. Now, I'm getting mad right now just thinking about it. It's like 15 years ago. It's one thing to cut me off. That happens. You could be in a hurry. You could have not seen me. You could just be a bad driver. That's not really going to get under the preacher's skin too much, being in a hurry and cutting me off. But when you cut me off and then act like it's my fault, oh, Lord, my Christianity is tested. So this guy cuts me off, and I can't remember what I did next. Did I go and cut him off? I did some stuff. I don't know what I did. I can't remember. I did some stuff. It was not the Christian response that I'm going to preach about in the next sermon. I did some stuff. Then this guy rolled down his window. He rolled down his window. Then he started saying some words to me. And those words were not Christ-like. I told you I was on my way to preach, right? Sabbath morning. He rolled down his window. This is my wife started to get worried when she saw my hand reach for the window switch. So when my left hand went for the window switch, then the preacher's wife's hand came to my right hand, which was on the console. I started getting the tap. It was too late. Emotions had taken over. And I rolled down that window, and he said some words to me, and I said some words to him, and we just had words. Y'all got to pray for the preacher. I'm still growing. I'm still growing. So I really didn't. I don't always listen to my wife like I should. I should listen to my wife. I didn't listen to my wife. But here's what got me. This is when you ever had the Lord punch you in the face?
Oh, yeah.
Man, he punched me in the face all the time because I need it. Just like he's reaching down from heaven, just smacking me. So there I am in the truck, okay, window down. I'm going back and forth, and I look over my shoulder, and who do I see? Primitivo Josiah Davis. He's, 6 months old, little guy. And he back there, he looks at me, smiling, just a little pretty baby. And the Lord, man, pulled me out of that truck and said to me, "What, preacher? What kind of example are you setting for your child?" Amen. Now, praise the Lord. He was only a few months old, so he probably doesn't even remember this story, right? Praise the Lord, right? But God really spoke to me with my first child before he's even 1 year old and said, "Hey, man, you have a responsibility in this training program. Amen. That child is going to do what you do." See, a lot of preachers fool themselves. See, my sons know me. I can preach all kinds of sermons up here. Y'all can say amen all you want. My boys know me. That's why I don't like to be a hypocrite up here, because I'll get called out at home. That sermon, please. You don't do that. My kids, because they're my kids. They are my children. So one of the two of them will say, "Come on, Dad, seriously. That was a total farce." So I got to bring it. I got to be honest up here. My wife won't do that to me. She's so gracious and kind. She won't do it to me. My boys would have hit me up real good. Point number 1, education begins at home in the training plan. You got to take care of little Johnny. You got to lead by example. And listen, we have to talk to our kids. We have to talk to our kids at home, not talk at our kids. We have to talk to our kids. And stop trying to be perfect. That's another problem we have as parents. You've made some mistakes. Amen. Tell your kids the mistakes you made. Amen. Tell your kids the things you wish you would have paid attention to in 9th grade in academy that you did not pay attention to and you suffered or are currently suffering the consequences of. I don't know why we try to fake it at home. Just stop. It doesn't work. Talk real to your kids. Some of you need to circle the wagons. I know I'm not just talking to people who have young children. Now, some of you have adult children. Some of you with adult children, you need to circle the wagon. You know what I mean by that? You need to come back around and have some honest discussions with your children. Tell them how you failed. Tell them what you should have told them 15, 20, 30 years ago. Tell them now. They're still trying to find themselves. They're still trying to work out marriage. They're still trying to be a good parent. They're still trying to do things. It's not too late. You may be a little bit behind in the training program, but even with adult children, you can circle around and have some real talks with them. All right, we're moving, right? Talking about education. Number one, education begins in the home. Number two, have y'all heard this phrase? I think Pastor Rogers says this, have you ever heard education doesn't cost, it pays? Have you heard that? You never heard people say that? SGA education, it doesn't cost, it pays. That's a lie. I'm sorry, Mr. Principal. I'm trying to work with you. We're on the same team, but that's a lie. How much does it cost to go to Auburn Academy? How much? $10,000 for a day student a year. Do you break that up over? Can you do 12? Can you do 12 month payment, or does it have to be 10 months? Okay. So we're looking at what's that? $800 a month for one. For one. Day student, yeah, day student. So there's more of you staying there. Okay. So when I hear that Adventist education doesn't cost, it pays, you a liar. Mr. Principal looking for my $800 check, and in my case, it'd be 3 times over. Right? So it does cost. It does cost. So let's not say it doesn't cost. However, your return on investment is much greater than what it costs. So when you go to invest your money, right, that's what I want to hear from the person fidelity. That's what I want them to tell me. Chaplain Davis, you give us $1,000, and over this length of time, based on this amount of risk, we are pretty sure that your $1,000 will become $10,000. Okay, then here's my $1,000. Right? That's how investments work. And so you hope if you are investing over a lifetime, talk about training, which should start at about 22 to 62, 40 years. That's a whole other sermon. That's in my notes. I'll wait on that one. When I talk to an investor, that's what I want them to tell me. I want them to tell me that the amount of money I'm giving them, they will increase exponentially. That's what Christian education is. It may cost me $800 a month, but the results that I will see in my children are eternal. So when you compare $800 a month to eternal benefits, it's a small price to pay. So I like to stay in the middle. I don't want to go so far, because this is what I hear other people say. This is my second point under doesn't cost, it pays. I hear church leaders say also, sacrifice to send your children to Adventist education. Make the sacrifice. I don't agree with that at all, because I don't think it's an issue of sacrifice. I think it's an issue of stewardship. Amen. It's not an issue of sacrifice. Amen. It's an issue of stewardship. The same reason I don't tell people to sacrifice to send their children to Adventist education is the same reason you will never hear me stand up in anybody's pulpit and ask for money. I don't ask for you to pay tithe. I don't ask for you to pay offering. I don't ask for you to get the money together to send your kids to school. I ask you what God asks of you. God asks you to be a steward of everything he has entrusted you to be, to have.
Amen. Amen.
You are a manager of anything that God gives you. So anything that goes in your bank account, your children, these are all things that you are to manage for God's glory. I find that when people properly embrace biblical stewardship, there is no problem paying tithe, giving a liberal offering, or sending their children to Adventist education. It's a stewardship problem. Let me be very honest. A lot of people can't afford to send their kids to Adventist school. And the reason you can't afford it is because you are a poor steward. You have a lot of debt. You live above your means. You don't have proper financial priorities. You're living paycheck to paycheck. I'm not preaching at you. I'm talking to myself as well. And so at the end of the month, you look at the $800 it needs to send your child, and you say to yourself, I don't have it, which legitimately is true. You don't have it. But it's not because you need a better job. It's not because you need a greater income. It's because you're not dividing your money properly. Let me tell you where Americans spend their money. You ready? Ready for this? This is where we spend our money. The average American, you know how much they spend on their house? Now, financial advisors will give you an actual number on what is a wise percentage of your salary. But we don't choose our homes that way. Right? So basically, if you are wise with your finances, you look at your salary, whatever that is, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $150,000, whatever your salary is, you look at that number, and then a wise person with their finances say, based on how much I make, this is what I can afford to live in. Right. And then that's where you live. But that's not how we pick our houses. Yeah, we want to live in a certain neighborhood. We want a certain look. We want so many rooms. You can't afford it.
That's right.
The average American spends 41% of their salary on their home. That's the average American. 41%. That's mortgage and then utilities. 41%. We are approaching halfway, and you haven't done anything else that you need to pay.
Amen. That's right.
41%. Let me give you the rest of the numbers. 41% on the home. Average American spends 16% on transportation. Talking about you can't send your kids to Adventist school. Man, you driving an $80,000 Mercedes. No, let me just get real with you. I understand if I don't get to preach another sermon. I understand. You're driving an $80,000 Mercedes. Do you know what the car payment on it is on that? You can get a couple kids to Auburn. But you want to drive that Mercedes. That's why I say it's not an issue of having the money. It's an issue of stewardship. See, we don't really like to think about it, because if we thought about it, it's a pretty easy decision. I mean, heck, you can drive a nice Toyota for $40,000. That's still pretty nice. Now, listen, I don't get in the business. I'm not trying to tell you what you can drive, because some people can afford an $80,000 Mercedes, and some people can afford a $1.5 million home. If you can afford it, that's God's blessing. Live in it. Drive it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, based on what God is giving you, have the proper priorities. Yes. If you make $40,000 a year, you should not be driving an $80,000 car. Amen. You don't need to have a math degree. I make $40,000, my car costs $80,000. Remember the kitchen. I'm 6 minutes over the kitchen. All right. Let me tell you where else the money is, because I want you to know where your money is, since you don't. 14% spent on food, 8% spent on health care, 7% goes to utilities, average American. 5% goes to entertainment. I like to have a good time like the next guy. I enjoy life. But you're telling me you don't have the money to do what God has asked you to do for your children, but you're spending 5% of your income on entertainment. Maybe we just need to come down to 2%. Maybe one less whatever you're doing for entertainment and a little more to training up your child the way they should go, because you only have 18 years to do it. 4% they categorize as miscellaneous, 3% to clothes. Don't make me get started on your clothes. Do you know if you have one pair of shoes? This is an old statistic, but do you know if you have one pair of shoes, you're like in the top 10% of the world's population? One pair. Now, you really want to be rebuked? How many shoes you got in your closet? Seriously. What? Right? Just putting things in perspective, folks. Putting things in perspective. We have money. It goes somewhere. Maybe it's not going where it's supposed to go. I'm not preaching at you. I'm preaching to myself as well. So do you know what the lowest number is on the expenditures of the average American? It probably is low. That didn't even make the thing, so it probably is low. The last number on this that I pulled from the internet was education. 2%. 2%. Oh, I lied to you. I got 4 points. Okay. Education begins at home. That's point number 1. Education doesn't cost, it pays. I explained that. Stewardship is the real answer. Number 3, education. Let me just go real quick with this. You got to understand what education is. I think sometimes we don't even understand what education is. Our education is designed to prepare you for earth and eternity. Amen. And there is a balance. There is a balance. Earth and eternity. Now, I tell you, you Adventists, you do have a tendency sometimes to be so heavenly minded that you are no earthly good. Church folk. Yes, God is the most important thing in my life. Absolutely. The Son of God gives me salvation and is a free gift that gives me eternal life. Nothing is more important than those 2 precepts and concepts. And yes, I want my children to be trained in these concepts from infancy unto adulthood. In addition to that, I got to live on this earth 70-some years. It's the average. If you're pure Adventist like my wife, you get 85, 90 years.
Amen. Amen. Yes. Good health.
I know I'm going early, so I got a good insurance plan for her. Earth and eternity. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't know what's going on at Auburn. I don't know. You're 6 months in? Okay. So I don't know what's going on there. So this is not directed at you or the academy or any of our Adventist institutions. But I can tell you, there are a lot of things, although I would not be standing before you today if it were not for Adventist education. That's the truth. I can tell you where I would be. You want to know where I'd be? Yeah. This might be too transparent for y'all. Oh, y'all might not listen to me no more.
I will. No, I won't even say that.
Were it not for Adventist education, I would be a rich, conceited, self-consumed, womanizing heathen. That's the truth.
I understand.
I promise you that is the truth.
You're not in God. You might as well be the best you can.
And every skill set that I use to build God's kingdom would be being used to build myself and to accumulate the things of this world. Amen. That's where I would be without Adventist education. I promise you.
Amen. Thank God.
I forgot where I was going. See, sometimes that's why you got to have sermon notes. Oh, I was talking about earth and eternity. That's where I was going. However, there's some things that Adventism, and in particular Adventist education, did not prepare me for. Brother Principal, I want you to hear this. And there are things that I'm self-correcting today. I graduated from Adventist Academy. They never taught me how to invest. Did not talk to me once about how to invest. Right? I have to be good with money to be a good steward. I really do. I got to be able to take the money that God gives me and do godly things with it. But somebody's got to teach us that. And we need to do a better job at home, in the church, and at school with teaching people how to deal with money. Nobody ever taught me how to buy a car. Never talked about that in academy. It's a simple class. I give it to my kids all the time. Hope y'all know y'all shouldn't be buying new cars. If y'all don't know that, we had that seminar tonight. It's a poor investment. You can get a new to you car. You can get new to you. It'll still smell new. It'll be brand new. But it'll save you $5,000, $10,000. If y'all don't know how to do that, please see me. Please. But nobody taught me that. So I graduated from college and I started working for the conference and I bought a new car. And wasted $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 of my paycheck. We got to do better. We got to teach our kids at home. We got to teach our kids in the church. We got to teach them how to deal with money. We got to teach them how to invest. We got to teach them how to buy a home. We got to be practical. Education has got to be practical. Y'all know how easy it is to make $1 million? Yeah, it's easy. It's easy if you know how to do it. You know, there are people, and I'm not talking about no Ponzi schemes or crazy risk investment. I'm talking about Christian stewardship. From the age of 22 to 62 will net you millions of dollars in the bank. If you don't know that, you need to see me. I will tell you how to do it. I wish somebody would have told me. The problem is it takes time and it takes consistent, you have to consistently put amounts of money in. That's all it takes, time and consistency. And if somebody would have told me that at Academy, if somebody would have told me that at the Adventist University, I surely would have done it. But nobody told me. And so when I'm in my 30s, I start reading books, I start talking to people, I'm like, oh man, I'm 15 years behind. So I can't get that back, right? I can't get that time back because it takes time for your money to grow. I don't want to get on money, but it's important. It's important. Ooh, they're getting mad at me down there, but I got to go. Let me tell you what else education is. That's my third point. What is education? It's to prepare us for earth and eternity. Number two, good education doesn't teach you what to think. It teaches you how to think. Good education doesn't teach you what to think. It teaches you how to think. I'm going to tell you, I think Adventism is scared of that principle. I'm going to be honest with you. If you look at our evangelism, if you look at our sermons, if you look at our institutions, we are big on teaching people what to think. Just got to be honest with you. We bring them in and we tell them this is what you do. This is how you eat. This is how you drink. This is how you sleep. This is what you do. This is what to think. And do you ever wonder why, I'm going to really step on some toes here, but you're no anomaly. You ever wonder why we baptize 100 but keep 10? I can tell you why. It's our fault. Amen. We did not teach them how to think spiritually. We taught them what to think. And that does not produce conviction. Amen. Amen. I can't convict anybody with my little sermon. Right. I have no power to convict anyone in this audience. Right. Only God can convict. So what I'm trying to do in every Bible study I give, every sermon I preach, is to teach people how to think in terms of God. Amen. Why reading and studying the Bible is important. Amen. What church does. I'm trying to give them principles. Amen. So that they know how to think in terms of spiritual things, and I let God convict. There you go. Amen. See, the problem with that is, here's that time thing again. If I use that principle, then I don't know when you're going to give your life to God. I don't know when you're going to start paying tithe. I don't know when you're going to stop smoking. I don't know when you're going to stop adulterating. In Adventism, traditionally, we want you to stop as soon as you get here. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Come on in and stop all you're doing, which is foolishness. Because none of us did that. You know what we did? We put on a nice suit and a nice dress and a nice hat and we just look like we stopped doing it.
Yeah.
We didn't do it. And so we're just trying to recreate that same wheel. This is not a sermon about evangelism. Let me stick with education. We need to teach people in education. We need to teach our young people how to think, not what to think. And lastly, in education, we got to create lifelong learners. Amen. Education is not about middle school and elementary school and high school and college. It's lifelong. Amen. Amen. I'm still learning. I'm still reading. I'm still studying. I'm still asking questions. We need to create lifelong learners. When you stop learning, you are in danger. All right, let me say this and then we're going to get out of here. I'm going to ask you to make a commitment and we're going to get out of here. I think there's some things we can do better. So I talked about education starting in the home. I talked about what it really costs you to educate our children in Adventist education. It really doesn't cost you much compared to what it gives you. I talked about what education is. And let me finish with this. I think there's some things we can do better in education. Amen. Okay? So principals and conference administrators often fall into the same category as myself as a pastor. And here's that category. Y'all sit out there and act like it's our job. You do. You do. You sit in this pew and you think the pastor's job is to run this church and evangelize this community and visit the sick and do all the stuff that pastors do, and you are wrong. You are wrong. In fact, you probably don't even know what the pastor's job is. That's a whole nother sermon. I bet you couldn't tell me what my job is as a pastor. You think you do. Oops, somebody said it. Y'all must have had some training at this church. Or it must be a pastor out there. He's disguising himself. He's on vacation, and he's disguising himself. It's not my job. I'm supposed to visit everybody in the hospital, me alone. I'm supposed to counsel and console and pray for everybody alone. It's our job. The Bible talks about the priesthood of all believers. Not the priesthood of pastors and the pew people. Let me get back to education. Yes. Y'all think the same thing about the school. That's right. Everybody want to point the finger at the school. That's right. School ain't doing this. We need better this. That's right. They should be doing this. Why the board didn't vote this? Why we don't have this? The computers are old. Everybody got something to say. That's right. Get involved. That's right. Talking about the things we can do better. Get involved. Listen, let me tell you something. How many people we got in here? 80, 90, 100, more than 100 people. You know what would really set this principle off in a good way? If this week y'all all got together and said, we need to make our Adventist institutions a success. I might not have money, but I got something. I got time. I got knowledge. I got love. I got stuff I can give. It's free. And some of y'all got money. You can give that too. I got stuff I can give. Imagine if everybody in this audience, Mr. Principal, imagine if Monday morning you had 100 emails in your box said, Principal, tell us what we can do to help. And they meant it. Amen. Oh, my God. Amen. God be praised. It'd be like me getting a whole bunch of emails. Pastor, tell me what we can do to better the church and better the community. I'm ready to work. Amen. It don't always take money. That's why I don't like asking people for money. If you're right with God and you're a good steward, you'll give the money. That's between you and God. I don't like to get in your business because I don't like nobody in my pocket. I'm not trying to get in your pocket. You just get right with God, all that other stuff will fall in line. Get involved. Amen. Amen. What we can do better. Get involved. Honey, I'm preaching too long. I got to sit down. Get involved. I'm not even going to touch the rest of that. It's going to take me too long. I will just say this. We need to get involved. We need to do better. Amen. And I think, no, I'm not even going to touch that. I'll have to touch that later. Play something for me. Yes, please, play something for me. I'm not even going to touch that. That's going to take me another 10 minutes. I will say this. Brother Principal, you can take this back to the conference office. I will say this. Stewardship is both an individual requirement and a corporate requirement. Okay? You should be happy to be in a representative form of church government. I don't know if you guys know what that means, but all churches are different, how they set up, right? And Adventist church, we have a representative form of church government, which means you actually have a voice. But you only have a voice when you get involved. You got to be involved. You got to go to the meetings. You got to get the newsletter and read it. You got to reach out to the principal, like actually talk to him instead of talk about him. Listen, I don't know nothing about y'all business. I don't know if somebody's doing that or not. I'm just preaching out of my experience. Amen. Talk to the man instead of talk about the man. And see what you can do to make things better. But I would say this. I'll take my little shot and I'll sit down. Sometimes when I look across the conference, I see some nice things. I tell you, I see some nice conference offices. Nice. And sometimes I go to our schools, and I'm like, man, what? Could they have not cut you a little bit of that? That's just for the YouTube conference people who will get mad at me. Okay, so listen. I told y'all know. Every time I preach for a reason. That's right. It's for you to do something. I'm asking you to do something today. I don't just come in here on Education Day, talk about education, and go home. So here's what I'm asking you to do. We're going to go eat. Number one, if you have small children, I'm asking you to create a training plan. Go back to that text for me so they can see it. I'm asking for you to create a training plan. How are you going to intentionally train your children? Amen. What are you going to do? Amen. This is not some thought. Go home and write it out. What are you going to do to train your children in the way that God would have you to train them? Amen. Amen. Number two, if you have adult children under the same venue, here's what I'm asking you to do. Go back and talk to your adult children. Don't stop training. You need to take a tone of advice. You can't tell them what to do, but go talk to them. Tell them about your failings. Tell them where you messed up. You don't have to be a perfect parent. The truth is, they know you're not perfect anyway. So you might as well just go ahead and give them the explanation and tell them how not to do it themselves. There you go. That's number two. Number three, they say it takes a village to raise a child. You know, we have a lot of broken homes. I came from one. A broken home, right? You might be doing all right by your kids, but there's somebody else's kids. They don't have a mother, or they don't have a father. That's right. In some cases, they have neither. That's right. Educate those children. Look around this church. Amen. When you see little Johnny, you know, the funny thing about little Johnnies is there are some moms who would like some help with little Johnny. And they're just waiting for a loving brother or sister to come alongside and not be accusatory, not be judgmental, but say, sister, can I help you? Amen. Can I watch little Johnny for the evening so you and your husband can go be husband and wife? Then when you get little Johnny, you school him up. But some people are waiting for that. Amen. They want that. So I'm asking you to look around and see whose children you get up. That's what we do with the little baskets. We're collecting money to help those who can't. Last two things I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to get involved. I don't know what that means to you. I mean, heck, you can email the principal. I mean, I hope he'll respond. We got a whole bunch of principals. We got a whole bunch of schools. I mean, email them, talk to them, see what you can do. Don't want to send your kids there because you don't like what's going on in school? Get involved. Change it. Nothing happens on the sideline, folks. That's right. That's right. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to meet you with open arms if you would just go talk to them. You'd be surprised. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe it. Everybody's not out to be honoring. Everybody's not out to hurt. Everybody's not out to do injustice. Not everybody. Some people, we'll talk about that in my next sermon, but not everybody. Right. Yes, and last but not least, I want to challenge you in your stewardship. That's between you and God. But you got to go look at that budget. You got to look at where your dollars are going. It's not just about Adventist education. It's about every penny that God gives you as a steward. Amen. Are you doing what he's asked you to do with those funds? Let's pray. Father in heaven, I'm not going to ask anybody to move. I'm not going to ask anybody to stand. I'm just going to leave them with a portion of your spirit. I have said a lot of things today, Lord, which I believe come out of that text in Proverbs. There are things that we need to do. There are adjustments that we need to make. There are talents that we need to give. There is assistance that we need to provide We got to do something, Lord.
Amen.
We got to prepare.